Hey, January 29th. I'm Jamie Fitzpatrick in for Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. It is time to get political, time to get a read on the political climate right now and the issues driving the agenda. And to do that, we have filled the studio with folks who love talking politics. Maybe we can start an argument. Before we get rolling on this show, want to know that you can join in the conversation. If you have any thoughts, you can send an email to thesignal@cbc.ca. You can leave a voicemail that we can hear at 709-576-5260. And you can text 709-327-8206. That's 327-8206 for a text. Now, a reminder, too, that if today's discussion spurs any thoughts that occur to you later, after we're off the air, we still want to hear from you. We're going to continue the discussion with your emails and messages on a future edition of The Signal. So, not even 1 month into 2025, and it's already been a busy year in politics. Elections on the horizon, U.S. tariffs looming, the debate still raging over the Churchill Falls deal. And beyond the headlines and the issues, what do we make of the tone of the political debate these days? If you're a student hoping to help change the world, or you're just getting started on your career path, do you want any part of the political scene in 2025? It doesn't always look like an open and inviting space these days. Anyway, that's one of the questions we can put to today's panel in particular, because they're all youngish, certainly young compared to me. First of all, I'd like to introduce Cassie Drodge. She does research and political advocacy here in St. John's, wears many hats. Hello.
Hello, Jamie. Nice to be here.
Ben Oates is a MUN student in engineering and a young Liberal, keeping a close eye on the current leadership race. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Jamie. Good to be here with you guys.
John Harris is editor-in-chief of The Muse, the student paper at the university, and he's in his final year of a degree in history and French. Hi.
Hey, Jamie. How's it going?
And Christina Ennis is president of the Women's Progressive Conservative Association. She also works in business development and HR consulting and ran as a PC candidate in the 2021 provincial election. Hi.
Thanks for having me back.
Thanks all of you for being here. And so to get the discussion started, I want to hand it over to you guys. I want to hear from each of you on maybe a big story or a big issue that's on the table right now. What are you following most closely? What could be the local or the international or anything in between stories that you think might drive the agenda for the coming months and the rest of this year? Christina, I want to start with you.
Sure, I'd be happy to kick us off here. So I feel like everyone here in this room will kind of be on the same page with this, in that I am seeing a lot of folks who are generally kind of uninformed about how the political systems work, whether it's municipally, provincially, or federally. And there's so much going on that people are having a really difficult time deciphering what things even mean. That are being reported on in the news, particularly with younger generations. We are just kind of inheriting a lot of this information from people who are older than us and just expected to kind of go along with things. However, I really believed in informed decision making, and so I've kind of been channeling my efforts into trying to get more basic information about politics out there. And I might be straying a bit from your question originally, but I'm seeing a lot of divisiveness online with folks who, from my perspective, are uninformed about how these things work and how party politics actually works. All of us around this table right now are involved in very different parties, but we are all going in the same direction to make a better place. We are sitting here very cordial, very respectful. I would say these folks around this table are my friends, and it would be awesome if folks could recognize that people can get along across party lines. I'll just throw in one example. Equal Voice, amazing organization to try and get women and gender diverse people involved in politics, whether it's as a candidate or at the grassroots level. And just yesterday, I commented on, it made me really emotional actually when this happened yesterday, because it just is really discouraging. I was congratulating a woman for coming out and putting her name on the ballot again. I didn't expect this. Apologies. and someone replied and basically accusing me of being fake or not having a positive intent of congratulating this person for putting her name forward. And it would just be amazing if people could recognize that we can actually get along, and we have to get along in order for this to be better.
Okay, I think that's one of the things we're going to dig into a little more later in this hour. So I'll leave it there for now. Ben, what's on your mind these days?
I'd first just like to start and say thanks, Christina, for sharing that. I know that's can be tough. I can imagine it was tough to go through. And I know as a woman in politics, as both of you might or must know, that it's, you guys are held to a different standard, and I can't imagine how difficult that is. Tend to agree with Christina's point. I think that's a baseline, not basement issue is in terms of importance, but like that's a foundational problem with a lot of the politics and political climate we have on the go in these days. And I think that, if people are not informed, it makes them easier conduits for misinformation or vitriol and stuff like that. In terms of hard, cold brass tacks issues, I'll start big and whittle my way down. Again, I don't need to tell your audience and the people around the table that the threat of the big red menace down south is going to have an impact on us. It's inevitable. We need to be prepared. We need to make sure the right people are in charge. We need to make sure that Canada and Newfoundland and Labrador are well represented at this table. I believe we are being so. Then go a little bit further. Provincially, we've got we're still facing some of the core issues that this province faces in terms of economic difficulties, but also a demographic problem, healthcare. All these things tied together, and there are issues, but there's key things we can focus on to help fix that. So I think they're being worked on. Let's have a productive discussion on how to fix them. And in terms of municipal politics, I think personally municipal politics is the bread and butter, because this is most people interact with you got to think about politics, in my opinion, from the perspective of the average person, right? Who's walking around? What do they interact with? What systems are they, doing with? And what aren't they happy with, right? So you think, the run of a day, if someone goes to the doctor, okay, you're dealing with the provincial government. If someone goes to has to deal with the CRA, it's federal. But if you're driving on roads, walking on a sidewalk, dealing with your property taxes, putting in a new deck, you're dealing with the municipal government and stuff like that. And I think there's an issue with the city of St. John's. I think it was today or yesterday they announced that they canceled a density housing project there, and I think it was Center City, and that's a concern of mine. Is we hear all this big push from the feds, and I agree with it that there's a housing crisis. There is. I'm going to be in the market in a couple of years, and I'm quite frightened to see things climbing up above what I'm able to afford, even though I'm going to be graduating with an undergrad in engineering. And I'm going, can I afford this bungalow, right? So I can't imagine that's an issue municipally that's on my mind, is the whole shutting down the housing project. But yeah, I rambled a bit. Sorry about that, Jamie and John.
All good. Cassie, what's on your mind?
Oh my gosh. Well, on top of everything that Christina and Ben already mentioned, there is a large concern regarding, I guess, political efficacy, for lack of better word. So again, people aren't really sure exactly where the problems are coming from, kind of like what Ben was speaking about, but then they're not sure actually who makes the decisions or who's actually at the table when decisions are being made. And so I feel like a lot of the time I share the same frustration that a lot of other folks feel, especially that's coupled with fear for the future, fear that, you do all the right things as a young person and still you're kind of left in this precarious situation. Ben, like many others, is trying to pursue a very professional line of work or career, and then we're kind of left with little to no hindsight as to what's actually going to be planned for the future. Are we going to have affordable housing? Are we going to have accessible healthcare? Are we going to have free education? Because all of those things contribute to a thriving society, and if we're not contributing to those things, then we're going to see a decline in the quality of life. So I do have here just very briefly noted, I would like to see politicians taking care of people on the planet and not necessarily taking care of profit as one of their priorities. And so I feel contingency plans, they need to have different success markers. And I feel everyone's confused on what success looks like, including policies and politicians. So like we're talking about like housing development, we're talking about boosting people's socioeconomic statuses, we're talking about even climate adaptation and change like that. There's really no, I would say there's no informative pathways kind of like reaching at what Christina was getting at. There was no information to inform certain decisions or certain narratives that would engage people to not only know the information, but to like think critically about what's happening inside their house and also outside of their doors. But I'll leave it there for now.
Okay. John, what would you like to put on the table?
Well, I think that we have not recovered financially as people in this province or as a country from the impacts of COVID and the economic downturn that's come from it. I think we have a extremely lagging minimum wage at $15.60 per hour when we have the livable wage put at around $24 for the island and $27 for the Northern Peninsula and Labrador by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. I think that people are struggling with the cost of food. We've seen it rise by 40% since 2020. We've seen the cost of housing rise by 30% to buy a new home. Like Ben, I worry about entering the home ownership. I think that it's something that I think was taken for granted by previous generations, that you would be able to, with a salary, be able to put some money aside and buy your first home. And I think it's further and further away for young people now. 1 in 5 homes in Canada are owned by investors, and it's becoming harder for young people to enter the job market. I think there's a lot of uncertainty that has not really gone away since COVID, and we're seeing a growing oligarchy take form in the United States. It's very prevalent with the rise of Donald Trump and the big tech oligarchy that's behind him. But also in Canada, we have 5 big banks control 90% of that market share. We have 5 grocery chains controlling 80% of the market share of groceries. We have 3 telecom companies that control 90% of the telecom market. And so we have, I think, a unchecked corporate power and unchecked corporate oligopoly on our economy. And that needs to end if young people and if the average people are going to be able to make a living and have any kind of say in our own future, especially as Canadians, as we see our own sovereignty being checked by corporate power and by Donald Trump. So I think that we need to really look toward ways to break ourselves, I think, from the economic dependence that we have on the United States. We have 77% of our exports go to the U.S. We import 50% of our goods from the U.S. I think we need to be looking toward more global partners that are not seeing the rise of fascism in their country. I think that it's a time for Canadian to lend an olive branch out to the rest of the world and to build trade relationships and build other relationships so that we're not tied to what is inevitably becoming the future of the United States, which is unfettered oligarchy.
So over the course of the discussion we're going to have from here, and there's already a lot that you guys have put out there, I'll be directing questions to start with to one or the other of you, but please, anybody can join in. Also, if I start up with a topic or a question, it's just a starting point, and you are more than welcome to take detours if you think that's necessary. We've seen a couple of references here early on to the U.S. election, most recently, and the new administration, and the Red Menace, as you call them, Ben. And I'm wondering, I don't see it in this room, but do you guys see it anywhere? Is there any kind of evidence that there's any groundswell for the Trump style or the Trump agenda on the ground around here?
I mean, where you stand depends on where you sit. I honestly think in terms of just my social media consumption, but also talking points that some people I know were kind of regurgitating, right? This goes back to that being informed things. These people who are not, generally up to date on politics, but they see a video or something like that and they're like, this is crazy. And it's just blatantly not true. But, before Trump took power, not even before Trump took power, before Trump started to take action, like we've seen recently, people were some people, limited elements, were starting to like drink the Kool-Aid a little bit of the MAGA types. What we're seeing after Trump has started to threaten the sovereignty is this incredible groundswell of Canadian, sovereignty and support that spans across party lines. Right? You have, I know a lot of, I think everybody here in this room, it's safe for us to say that I'd rather be, let's be polite, I'm never going to be an American.
We are Canadians.
Yeah, Canadians. I am a Canadian. I'm a Newfoundlander.
Newfoundlander.
Yeah, exactly. Newfoundlander and a Canadian. I will never be an American so long as I'm alive. Take from that what you will, Yanks. Yeah, I think in terms, we have a great conversation going on nationally and also around this table of what do we do about it now. I'm going to make no mistake about it. I'm a young liberal. I'm backing Mark Carney in the upcoming leadership race for Prime Minister because I think he provides, I think that's more along the direction that we need to go. Respond to the kind of the harbingers of chaos and fluff with cold, hard, center-left, progressive, but pragmatic policies. And that's what I think we're heading towards. We're having a great discourse about how to do that. And I think one thing that's been stood out to me is that almost nobody's talking about, whether or not we should join the U.S. is just how do we make sure, what levers do we pull to make sure that we, as Mark Carney says, we have that safe third option. What do we do? Do we go focus on the economy? Do we focus on the military? Do we focus on what do we pick at? And that's what this discourse is on, in my opinion. Feel free to disagree. I love a good disagreement. But yeah, that's an important thing. So I think we're safe with that.
Okay. Christina, you're with the provincial Progressive Conservatives. Different organization from the federal Conservative Party.
Correct.
We would say. But amongst people that you move among, is there an opinion is there any sense that people think that the federal leader, Pierre Poilievre, is something of a Trump disciple, or is there just a stylistic, superficial resemblance? What do people make of him?
I can't speak necessarily to how federal conservatives are feeling about it. I am involved provincially with the Progressive Conservative Party of Newfoundland and Labrador.
I was just thinking you might be having conversations.
There's lots of conversations, but I'm going to go back to kind of what I started with around being informed. And one of the biggest things I'm seeing is people really afraid and just disengaging completely, which, in my opinion, is the opposite of what you should do if you're afraid. Learn more about it. Become informed on how to decipher between what is correct, like Ben just said about you see a video and something just looks absolutely wild and people just believe it and just kind of go with it. And on the opposite spectrum, people are just don't want to watch the news, don't want to read the news, don't want to be on social media, and really becoming more informed about how Canadian politics works, which we're a parliamentary system, versus United States politics, which is a completely different system. That at that base level might bring some comfort to people knowing that you can't just roll in and run for prime minister.
Yeah.
Like there is a process to go through, and good governance is a really important foundation of, how our political system works here. If anybody's been on TikTok since the TikTok situation in the U.S. has escalated, Commonwealth countries seem to have kind of been gathering together and informing people on parliamentary politics versus American politics has been something that I've
very different animal
channeling myself into.
Right.
If I could just touch on something Christina said, and I think one thing I've noticed, just to kind of blend two of our points together, is that there was an apathy towards Canadian politics, but also Newfoundland Labrador politics and local politics in general, because all we get is fed is U.S. media, U.S. media, U.S. media. Now that the U.S. administration has taken a direct position that does threaten not only Canada's economy, but the Mango Mussolini is taking swipes at our sovereignty, right? What I've noticed is that we now have something that we can all commonly rally behind, and good ideas can come out of that. And I think that's something that we were missing as a country for a long, long time, was something that everybody can believe in. So I think apathy is a product of it's a product of not selling pragmatic or realistic ideas. People need to feel like they can do something about some things, and they need to feel like not comfortable doing the things that they need to do, but they need to feel like there's a goal. We need to sell them a goal, an ideal, a picture of what Newfoundland, Labrador, and what Canada and what St. John's should look like. I think that's something that we haven't been doing. I'll take ownership of this as the Liberal Party for a long time. I think that we're seeing that now in all circles, and I think that the contrast, personally, for me is Mark Garneau had a good quote about it. It's like you got to look for the steak, not the sizzle, right? I think amongst a lot of politicians, you get two different types. You get people who are in it because they genuinely believe they want to make the place better, and I'd like to think that's most politicians, regardless of partisan stripe. But then you get some people who are just being opportunist. I think federally, you got to look at I know, not to start an argument too early in the conversation, but you got to stack up all the three party leaders' motives, but also their modus operandi, and also their CV at the end of the day, right? I think I'd ask your listenership and just ask everybody on the table, like, do you really think you want to send a guy like Pierre Poilievre, who's been on the public teat since he was my age, and doesn't know, has less than, he doesn't have anything in common with a roughneck on the Hibernia or a logger in BC or a fisherman or a nurse or something like that. He has less in common with someone like that than any of us sitting around this table. We need people who are selling a good, positive message, something that people can work towards, and you need someone who understands the struggles of everyday Canadians. And I do not think that's represented in our federal Conservative Party today. Federal.
Can I just link back to your direct question to me for just 1 second? Then I'm
Okay.
going to stop monopolizing the conversation. So I guess to answer your question and why I went back to I don't think people are informed about how our systems work is that it's not. I don't believe it's fair to compare a leader of any party to a leader in the United States of America, whether it's Democrat or Republican, because those parties are so fundamentally different than the three parties in Canada that they are not comparable. Republican politics and Democratic politics are not the same as Liberal, NDP, or Conservative politics in Canada. The most right party in Canada is like the most left party in the United States, sometimes, depending on who you talk to, depending on what state you're in. So I don't necessarily think it's fair to compare, and that indicates to me that people aren't, if they do think they're the same, not as informed as they could be on how people get into those roles. And
just to jump on this, I
All right,
agree.
but keep it quick.
Sorry, keep it quick. Agreed. I think the national conversation right now is who do we send in, regardless if it's of a Democrat or a Republican, where I don't think the comparison's being drawn. I don't think it is fair to draw a comparison between Pierre and Trump, but that's the conversation we need to have.
I want to pick up a different but related thread in that even amongst people I know who are really interested in politics and in public policy, which is not everybody, right? There tend to be a lot of conversations these days about what's happening in the U.S., about what's happening in Ottawa, and sometimes internationally as well. Cassie, you've done a lot of work with grassroots organizations over your time and have run into a lot of people. Do you find that it's tough to get people to pay closer attention to maybe what happened at last week's city council meeting, or how the provincial legislation might affect the way, I don't know, something is done in your own neighborhood? It's almost like focusing on the big picture too much. We can argue about what's happening in England or what's happening in the U.S. It's almost like we have a hobby to just argue about it. But is it harder to get people to focus on what's happening right at the street level where they live?
You know what, Jamie? I think that's a really interesting question because I don't think much has changed in the last week. When it comes to grassroots organizing and folks who have, you're looking at living and lived experiences when you're talking about grassroots organizing. So you have a lot of folks who are actually living the struggle that they're advocating for. So oftentimes I find it's kind of like a dichotomy. So you'll get folks who are very big on the issues, at this table. I know a lot of us have intersecting identities. Even some of us have pointed out some of the struggles that we're experiencing today and in society. But also you have folks who just work 3 jobs and who don't have food in their fridge, or they are trying to search for childcare the next day. So they're not really interested in learning about tariffs or learning about the anti-immigration policies, which honestly are absolutely affecting our Canadian GDP. It's affecting narratives and sorry, the lights just blinked. It's affecting like just opinions about folks who have constantly been the victims of state violence, who have constantly been marginalized due to policies or regulations. So I don't think much has changed other than maybe some of like the overall feeling of like what's to come. Like maybe like, okay, what John was pointing at, like we're not sure what's going to happen in the future. A lot of the policies that are being proposed or that are being clawed back, even internationally, do affect folks. So like you have people here coming from Colombia or Venezuela, and you know they have family members who are living in the States. So like if they're getting ICE called on them in the States, like they're calling their family members at home, like in Newfoundland, and like they're scared, right? So no, they're not going to go to like the town council meeting because their cousin is like likely to be deported. And if their cousin, heaven forbid, has like, you know, I mean, they already have like shaky status in terms of citizenship, but if they're part of the queer community, that makes it even worse. If they're a woman who's escaping gender-based violence or domestic abuse at home and they're being deported, that makes it even worse. So it's almost like folks who are in the grassroots sphere, we're still doing what we're doing, but we're feeling the secondary trauma even more from some of these fallouts, from some of these policies that inevitably, like, it feels like, yeah, it just affects like certain populations in the States, but actually like their family members, like their aunts, their cousins, their uncles, like their moms, you know, and because of already pre-existing policies that have hindered immigration, that have already split up families, that have already segregated queer and trans folks, like it's almost like it's doubled down again. So what do you do when you're in survival mode? I mean, like it's fight or flight, right? So I think a lot of people are wondering now, like, do we flee the scene or do we stand up and fight?
And I guess that makes it tough to stay like politically engaged, I guess we'd say, if you're uncertain about the fate of your own family, of the ground right beneath your feet. John, you talked a lot about the uncertainty that people are facing now. That in itself takes a huge toll, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the uncertainty is definitely something we need to team up together and defeat. But I think that the corporate influence that we see take place in the United States is not unique to the U.S. I think we see it right here in our province, Newfoundland and Labrador. We're the one of two provinces that have unlimited corporate donations to political parties. So these are agenda-setting things. When you have companies donating tens of thousands of dollars, whether it be developers, construction companies, or energy companies, to political parties, they're setting those agendas. They're creating those power networks, and I think it affects our politics, where you have decision makers considering much more than just the average day person, but also who is donating and giving the amount of money that you need to win an election. So I think we are in serious need of electoral finance reform in the province, and we need to make sure that the undue corporate influence is not that we see taking place in the United States doesn't affect us here at home. I think when we're looking at the information space, we live in an American information space. CBC, CTV, NTV, they're the last bastions of news. We see Polly-Ever wanting to completely Canadian news, and we see Polly-Ever wanting to completely gut the CBC, which I think is going to be horrible for Canadians in terms of trying to get Canadian content. We've already seen Mark Zuckerberg, who's now cozying up to Trump, completely ban Canadian news from his platforms, from Facebook, from Instagram, since 2022, and that has. What that impact has is already challenged Canadian sovereignty, because they will not respect Canada's law that says they have to share advertising revenue with news companies, and that was not, there's really no follow-up from the Canadian government. I think that when we look at these apps like TikTok, we see Amazon, Meta, all of these, and Elon Musk with his takeover of Twitter, now called X, all of these information leaders, these tech oligarchy, have coalesced behind Trump. So our information space as Canadians is very much United States dominated. So I think we need to be building our own kind of network so that the American influence in our movies, TV shows, and our music is not fully taking us over culturally as well as economically. So I definitely think that we need to have more independence when it comes to our foreign policy as well. I think Canada's response to Israel's invasion of Gaza has been very pitiful and shameful. When it came to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we saw us open our doors, accepted 900,000 visas to Ukrainians to come stay in Canada, which is great. 300,000 of them came and have been starting their lives here, which is restarting their lives here, which is phenomenal. But when it comes to Gaza, we've had a cap of 5,000 people to give them visas with the visa program for Palestinians. And that has been a failure. I think we didn't even have any support on the ground in Gaza to get them out of a war zone where we've seen, estimates of almost 200,000 people, and that's a few months ago from a study in The Lancet, killed by Israel's army. So I think that we have a really serious need to distinguish ourselves in the world stage from the United States, and to not be seen as a lapdog of the U.S. and to be always behind their interest, when we need to be looking to carve our own path and create our own relationships, whether it be in trade, whether it be in foreign affairs, with the rest of the world, and maintain our own sovereignty from what looks like a dying empire.
I have to agree with John, honestly, everything that you just said. And I think one of the things that's lacking across like all political realms, and honestly, something that's been slipping in Newfoundland in particular, is like this corporate accountability. I haven't seen any of our political leaders, except for Jagmeet, really just speak about like holding corporations accountable. And this does speak to the violence that's been happening towards Palestinians. Canada, specifically Newfoundland, has been dealing with the Norwegian oil and gas company, Equinor, who has ties with Delek Group Limited, which is on the United Nations watch list for being complicit in genocide in Palestine. So if we just keeping on that thread for a minute, if we keep investing in harmful relationships that are going to genocide marginalized people, that are going to jeopardize Canadian morals, that are going to jeopardize the way that we become leaders in the world as Canadians, it needs to stop. We need to have politicians that, like I said, stand up for the planet and the people as opposed to profit. We need more policies that hold corporations accountable, corporations that work in geopolitical atmospheres that make billions of dollars, that don't pay back to these countries that, they basically exploit. They're taking advantage of land that's previously owned and has, in my opinion, I would arguably say is still owned by Indigenous folks, whether that's like in the U.S. Or in Canada or even Palestine. And then, of course, you have basically this thread where I feel like a lot of times politicians put their hands up in the air and they're like, oh, well, what can we do? But at the end of the day, grassroots, we can only do so much. So I feel like kind of just stepping on like what John was saying, like if we don't have these types of narratives or types of reforms that really speak to, or really just give like transparency to some of these like revenues and maybe some of these companies that have been compliant in violence, state violence, compliant in hoarding wealth, hoarding labor, then I feel like we're just going to circle back to like the 1960s. And I do have a note here that I wanted to bring up, and thank you, John, for mentioning corporate accountability, because I feel like we need to be focusing on reciprocal economies, so like balanced relationships between countries that have an equal exchange. Either it's like labor, people, ideations, right? So I feel like if we move forward, if we want to put politicians on the forefront, if we're going to vote folks in, we need politicians that acknowledge the value in international exchange, whether it's people, labor, markets. And we also need to acknowledge that like when people come here, like they're bringing value. Like Canada, we need people to come here. So I feel like all of this anti-immigration, I know Alberta has kind of like hopped on the train regarding anti-immigration. I saw something this morning. I want people to really think about the talent and the innovation and the true gift that being center progressive, pragmatic really brings to the country.
Want to remind everyone that you're listening to The Signal on CBC Radio 1. I'm Jamie Fitzpatrick in for Adam Walsh. We're gathering your thoughts. If you have any, we can continue this discussion on a future show. If you want to send us an email, thesignal@cbc.ca, or leave a voice message at 709-576-5260. You can also send us a text at 709-327-8206. Let's take the discussion back to a point that Christina made earlier, or touched on earlier, about the tone of political debate these days and the consensus that it's getting uglier. The United States, perhaps the number one exhibit A on that front, but maybe getting more divisive just about everywhere. And I wonder, does the current political discourse make it that much harder to recruit good and committed people for the next generation of politicians, political activists, volunteers, and so on? Christina, do you want to take that up?
I definitely think that going forward, we're already experiencing it's difficult to recruit people to participate in politics, even if it's behind the scenes, let alone put yourself out there with the knowledge that you're going to get accosted on the internet and in person by people who are not happy with something related to whatever level of government you're participating in. The financial side of things is a huge challenge. One of my special skills is looping in regionalization into every conversation that I have here at CBC. And at the municipal level, I don't know if a lot of folks are aware of this, but most of our councils here in Newfoundland Labrador are volunteer councils. Where you have municipal elections coming up, what is the incentive to put yourself in a position to be harassed a lot of the time by people in your community for free and expected to prioritize that over everything in your life and be available 24/7? So, yes, it is difficult to recruit people to participate in these things. If you look at the skill sets that are from an HR perspective, there are no hard qualifications to be a politician, but the expectations are up here. For those on the radio, my hand is held above my head. Very high expectations. And if you think about the types of people who possess those skill sets and what they do for a living to generate an income right now, does that translate to being able to devote their next 4 years to being in a different role? Can they survive? Can they put food on the table, live within those means if you're used to whatever? Particularly at the municipal level, I see a major gap between being able to sustain that model right now because the rural Newfoundland and Labrador is not getting more populated. Who's going to run these councils? Right now, I can't imagine how many vacant council seats are in Newfoundland and Labrador right now. And how many councils will get acclaimed this September?
So anybody have any thoughts on how we could make political engagement more attractive? I mean, maybe start with deleting all your accounts?
No, don't do that.
Don't do that. How can we make it more engaging but also fruitful, I think, to Christina's point? My personal opinion is the best politician is the politician who never wanted to be a politician in the first place. Someone who has real world experience, someone who's lived it, someone who knows the nuts and bolts of the everyday world. In terms of, I think incentivizing people to join politics is a many-headed beast in the sense that if you want to take care of the quote civility or like, if you don't want to get attacked or yelled at or whatever online, I think that there's a baseline level of stress in society right now that's been on the go for a while that people are feeling that's just getting amplified because it gets clicks, because it drives the algorithm, whatever. People are freaking out and they are either fined or are given an avenue, an anonymous, behind a screen avenue to put that, frustration out on someone or something, they're going to do it. So take care of those baseline frustrations in terms of, we can probably all have different ideas on how to take care of those frustrations, but that's key number one. Key number two is I think it's crucially important to, again, make sure you know why you're there, why you're a politician, why you want to get involved, and go in with a plan. I keep saying to people, everyone I run into is just like, we need to lead with a plan, not a message. Lead with a plan, not a message. I think that's a very key thing. It's fine enough to talk about the issues that everybody's facing. It's a service. That's what opposition parties are for, or it's good discourse. We're in a free country. Let's keep the discussions going, but you need to lead with a pragmatic, tangible plan that you can fix things with, people that people can engage with. If people see something get followed from A to Z, they'll be more inclined to get involved, because they say, hey, I have a background in social work. I see a problem with this system, so I can get involved, whether it be on an EDA or running for council, running for MHA, whatever. I can go fix this problem. People need to feel empowered that they have the skill set to go chase it down. People need to feel like it's a fruitful thing, and I agree with Christina. I think that remuneration for council leaders is a good thing, even if it's it doesn't have to be a full-time job, but some sort of benefit. And people need to feel like they're doing meaningful work. They need to feel like they're executing a change. They're not just there for the sake of being there, right? I think that's a lead with a plan. Don't lead with a message, right? Find a problem, fix it.
I think that looking at provincial politics, it takes a lot out of somebody to be able to run for an election. So if you're a single mother, say your job won't give you time off, or you're having to take unpaid time off to run for politics, that ends up having a political system that favors the wealthy and people who don't need to work for their living, or can take time off work. Their position allows it. I think that we need to see some real reform when it comes to election finance. I think that it's much easier when you are when you're a wealthy person and you have wealthy friends, you can and you're connected in business and connected in the business world, you can finance a campaign and be able to, your message will be able to be stronger, because you can pay for door knockers, you can pay for flyers, you pay for advertisement. So we're privileging people who have connections with business connections, personal finance, and wealthy friends over the average day person who wants to put their name forward, but wouldn't be able to because of their economic position, their employment position. And there's a lot of jobs that you just can't take off time to run for politics, and that leaves a certain criteria and a certain group of people that are able to run for politics, and a certain people that can't. And I think that really needs to change if we're going to have a better representation of people in the political system. I definitely think that women, especially, need to be able to have issues like childcare. You have single mothers, you have people who want to put their voice out there and that need that extra economic support if they're able to run for politics.
Yeah, pretty much just what you said, John. I feel like there needs to be almost like a foundational reform in terms of like how we recruit, how we sustain, and how we support folks who actually want to make change. And I think, Ben, like you also spoke to like a really good point there. Like we really need to look at a plan as opposed to a message. And a lot of the times there are different timelines in terms of like the seat that you have in the House, like your outreach and the power that you have depending on the political position that you have. And then even just getting there, such as John was saying, has been almost like triumphant for women, especially women who come from single mother backgrounds, or who work multiple jobs, or who are just trying to make ends meet at the end of the day. And so from a grassroots perspective, I'm always looking out for what I call community champions. So very much what Christina was saying, these folks are usually on the ground. And what Ben was saying, they're usually the ones like finding the solutions, or the ones creating like the tangible pathways. But oftentimes they're not paid. And as John said, oftentimes they're not necessarily supported by like financial safety nets, or by organizations that might... Maybe their mandate is to drive like specific change. Maybe it is to drive the stats up in terms of marginalized seats in the House, or marginalized seats on council. I just feel like at the end of the day, if we don't acknowledge the barriers that have been stopping people from getting into politics, then we're not going to see a change. And just lastly, in terms of representation and political discourse, like our election system is divided by postal code, right? And so that did work traditionally from a sociological perspective in the 1950s when we were doing urban planning and infrastructure design. It made sense. And there's theories that back as to why we have kind of like regionalized these places by postal code and why we've developed different policies, because these places also inherently have socioeconomic patterns, they have cultural patterns, they have dominant linguistics, et cetera, et cetera. But now we see that like things are changing. Like we're in a cosmopolitan world. I wouldn't say this is like new in the last like 20 years. I would say since like the 1980s. So we're seeing like a mixture. Like you'll have like a row of housing, and you'll have somebody who works in like business HR. You'll have a CEO who like works remotely for like Deloitte or something, and then you'll have like a single mom who works at the bar who has like 2 other jobs, and they're all living in the same living complex. They're all living in the same area. So it's like, how are we going to cater to all of these needs, and how are we going to lay all of these concerns on the table so that they all actively have their space, they consider each other, and then they have like pragmatic pathways forward. So when we start looking at representation, political discourse, I think we need to look at who's in the community, how things are represented, in terms of problem solutions and who can take care of them, and then maybe rethinking how we make informed decisions.
Just to Cassie's point a little bit there, I think excellent points in terms of making sure that everybody's represented, right? Because that's the key point of democracy, really, right? But I think there's lots of ways you can get involved with politics and policy without necessarily running, right? I know for a fact, I know a couple of MHAs that you can call them up, send them an email anytime, and they'll be responsive. In terms of making sure people feel represented, I think discussions like these are key to it, right? Like you said, we're all from different backgrounds, different political persuasions, but we're all kind of saying the same similar sort of things. We might go to loggerheads on some issues, but I think at the end of the day, like you said, and like I was saying, like we've all kind of said, lead with a plan, let the message follow, and then let democracy do its thing, right? Let the people of this district or any given district or any different population say, okay, this is the candidate, this is the plan, this is the policy that works best for me, this is what we're going to pick. Sure, it might not work for everybody, and then the responsibility of the MHA who gets in there is to balance those concerns. Like, I was elected to do X, Y, Z, but I have Mrs. Hines over here who's needs this or Mr. whatever. That's the job of the MHA, is to kind of make that balance. But I think we need to lead with core, solid plans and messages. Lead with plans, let the messages follow. And I think that's the key thing. But again, to Christine's point and to your point, Jamie, that takes a certain degree of humility on behalf of both the MHA or the elected representative, but also the people, in the sense that take the little wins when you can get them. Advocate for yourself the best you can, but don't get angry or too upset if not every item on your checklist is ticked. Right? It's a two-way conversation at the end of the day. Right? It's not one. You're not shooting upwards and they're not shooting downwards. You need to meet in the middle. Right.
And it's not all about your personal agenda.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether you're the politician or the voter. Yeah.
I think both elected representatives and average people should not be afraid of walking in and going, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but this is what I'm feeling.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe less so the MHAs, but.
Can I say something overwhelmingly optimistic and positive, Davey?
I think that would be appropriate right now.
There's 4. I believe I'm the oldest of the young people here right now. I'm 34. The good news is there's lots of people like 4 of us who are ready, willing, and able to help people learn how to engage, even if we don't see eye to eye at a partisan level. We all get along fabulously. I would love to sit down for a coffee or a beer with anybody of any political stripe, because we like talking about politics because we think it's important to be informed about our community.
Yep.
And I know that for my entire adult life, things have not gotten easier, and I've been patiently waiting for things to get easier. And I know that it doesn't matter what party you're involved in. I know your lives aren't easier over the last 10 years either. Yeah. And that's what we all have in common. And millennials and Gen Z, we are motivated to make our lives easier. And we know that that can only happen together. And I see a lot more appetite for collaboration and just more a bit more positivity around collectively moving forward.
Hear, hear. We're all pulling on the same rope. We're just holding it different ways.
Absolutely. And just I guess to add on to the positive note, studies have shown that out of I'd say the 25 largest protests that have been successful throughout the world, 20 of them have been nonviolent. And out of the 20, the average attendance was 200,000 as opposed to 50,000 for violent protests. Oh. And 17 out of 20 of them made their success in less than a year. And that's from Harvard.
You know those numbers.
I do.
Because those are...
They're motivating.
They're good things to know at the beginning of the day, right?
Aren't they? I mean, getting together in unity is more successful and more productive than getting together to fight.
Staying informed is a challenge, even if you're really, really into it. I mean, when we have our next provincial election, whenever it is, there's a good chance that
on
the
the fixed
Churchill
election
Falls
date,
deal,
maybe.
There's a good chance that the Churchill Falls deal might be a big part of the discussion. I mean, that's a hard one to get your head around, even if you're taking a day off work to dig into the research. So staying informed is a challenge. I don't know if we can. If anyone has any thoughts on that before we wrap up, we only have a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, I think that there's sometimes an attitude that people can't understand things, and let's let the experts handle everything. I think that sometimes that's a bit talking down to people. I think people know a good deal when they see one. If we're looking at the Churchill Falls deal, what we're seeing is according to the president of Hydro-Quebec, their next best option is 16 cents per kilowatt hour, and that involves a high amount of capital to actually put into a new development of a similar hydroelectric dam in Quebec. What we're getting is about 6 cents. I think that there's a lot of room between the 6 and the 16 that I think should be renegotiated. I don't think that 6 cents for and however they get to that number, and that's a big convoluted combination of different things. But if we're just taking it at face value, there, the 6 cents is far off what I think is a fair price for hydroelectricity on Churchill Falls and the two new projects as well.
Seeing as how Ben put his hand up, he gets the clock says he gets the last word.
Sorry guys.
Okay,
first
go
off,
ahead.
great conversation. I just want to jump in and correct a couple things.
Correct.
Not correct. Well, yes, I will say correct, because you are correct that the Upper Churchill, which is the existing hydro dam, is being sold at 5.9 cents per kilowatt hour. However, when Gull Island is built, which is the main crux of the thing, is going to be sent at I think it's 15.2 cents per kilowatt hour is that we're going to sell it.
It's going to be cost plus.
Current market rate.
Correct. Current market
cost
rate.
plus. So that's not going to be adjusted to anything. So
yeah, there is an escalatory clause that can be negotiated within neutral Ontario Supreme Court and stuff like that. I think the MOU is an example of what confederation, what interprovincial politics should look like. Look, I know that there's an appetite to, we should squeeze Quebec for everything that we can get, but I think the whole MOU is out there, and if it's signed as it is written, which I think it will be, that's what I've heard, it's a good deal. I know that this province has been dunked on more times than we can count in these mega project sort of deals, but it's a fair deal. Nobody gets rinsed, but nobody walks away with a bag of money in their hand either, and that's the way it should be. I think we sell Upper Churchill for a lower rate because the asset's paid off, and then we're getting a fair market price for the Churchill Falls Upper Churchill Gull Island deal, because the question is, if wrap it up.
Yep.
Okay, that's all. I think it's a good deal. I think it's important to get it done now before we get a Parti Québécois government in Quebec, and I think it's the way this country should work.
I can tell by the way John's wrinkling his nose that this could really turn into something.
Could be a full hour, I think.
Yeah, we may have
go into
planted
another
the
hour.
seeds
We'll
for
come
the
back.
next show.
We'll be back.
We'll be back.
All right. Cassie Drodge, John Harris, Ben Oates, Christina Ennis, thanks for dropping by to talk politics today. It's been great.
Thanks for having me.
When
Thanks
is
for having
the
me.
fixed election date? You must know it.
October.
Okay.
2025.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for
Actually, it
that.
has to occur by the end of November. It has to be
All right.
called by mid-October.
No comment.
Only
see if
time
we
will
get
tell.
there. We'll see if we get there.
Ooh, what do you know, Ben?
Nothing. I know nothing.
This discussion will continue off air. I'm Jamie Fitzpatrick in for Adam Walsh. Thanks so much for joining us on The Signal today. All I can tell you about tomorrow is we have another great show coming up. Thanks for listening. Hope you can join us then.